Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvellously well. I'm sitting here with the great Bobby Owsinski, is that right?
Got it perfectly.
Okay, good. Well, it took me a little bit of time to sort of practice that one.
Practice makes perfect.
Oh yes, and I have a Polish wife, so if I mess this up, I'm in serious trouble. So look, I have a lot of questions to ask you.
Please.
Now, obviously, you're a mentor to so many people. You've got a lot of great books and a lot of great resources out there where people can. In fact, one of the ones I saw recently is really the one that I want to talk about. Because even though there's tons of mixing stuff of yours, which I've followed and used, and tips and tricks I've stolen from you, the big question I think on so many people's mind now is room acoustics specifically. Because of this revolution in DAWs where we can sit at home in any environment, bedrooms, garages, basements, all of these kind of environments, the problem we face is they're less than ideal. Now, you've had this out for about 6 or 7 years now.
Yeah.
And
It's not new, but it's still relevant because, let's face it, it's an evergreen subject.
physics are physics. They don't change with technology. The physics are the physics.
Yeah.
There'll be a link and all that kind of good stuff going on down here. So the question is, in your video that you did, I can't remember the budget you posed. It was very low of how you can massively improve your environment.
That was a presentation I gave at Nimbus Recording, Nimbus Studios, Nimbus in Vancouver. It's a school, recording school, which is a wonderful facility, by the way. One of the best anywhere when it comes to our business. And it was
Bob Ezrin's school?
Bob Ezrin's school, yes. It was how to fix your acoustic environment for $150 or less. And basically, the whole idea is your listening environment probably is the thing that you think least of. Now, not you because you're a pro, but many people are just getting into this, especially musicians that want to do their own recording. They'll buy expensive speakers, they'll buy expensive gear, but the last thing they'll think about is the acoustics of the room, which is the most important because it's the symbiosis of how the speakers in the room are working together. But it's not rocket science. It doesn't take a huge amount of money to actually fix your environment up. The whole thing to understand, though, is there are two parts to this. There's isolation and there's room treatment. So if you think that you're going to put some acoustic foam up on the wall and suddenly your kids next door are not going to hear, or the neighbors, no, that doesn't work that way. It's expensive to get isolation, but room treatment is inexpensive. If you can swing a hammer and you can buy a lot of the materials locally, it won't cost you that much at all to really make a big difference. Will it sound like this room? No, but you'll get pretty close. I mean, you'll get 90% of the way there. But as we know, with mixing, with everything that you and I do every day, it's the extra percent that costs the most money and takes the most time. That being said, this will get you a good way a good way along. All it is creating the proper environment for you to listen to, and it doesn't take all that much.
Fantastic. Is there specific things that jump out to you for in that budget that are going to make huge improvements to a room?
Well, the big thing is you want to create what they call an RFZ, which is a reflection-free zone around your listening space. And this occurs in every good playback environment. Whether you realize it or not, it's built into it. So you don't want to have reflections that are bouncing in your ears. You want to hear exactly what's coming out of the speakers without any reflections that are canceling out any frequencies. So the way you do that is by absorbing those frequencies on the walls and also the ceiling. And that's the big part. It's the ceiling part. So what you have to do is build some acoustic panels or buy them, because now you can get them a lot of places. And you put a few up on each side of the listening environment and over your head, and you're a long way there to creating that RFZ. Now, of course, the next big thing would be to fix the wall behind you so you don't have things that are splashing back at you, the back of your head. But again, that's not too difficult either, because you'll either deaden it with acoustic panels, or you can diffuse the sound. You can make it splay different ways. And you'll do that very cheaply and inexpensively with the bookshelf. Filled with things. The
Filled with
book,
things.
it just can't be a
Randomizing it.
Yes, you randomize it. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Now with isolation, you touched on that. I mean, that's a whole different
Yeah.
kind of discussion, because my studio is a room within a room,
Yeah.
and costs an absolute fortune to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. There's no way around that, because it takes a lot of material, because we're talking mass. And the next thing is mass means a lot of labor goes into it as well. And one of the biggest things that people kind of forget is the fact that you have to think of it like a fish tank. If there are any air spaces, the water drains out. And it's the same thing with your room. If you have any air spaces, then you're going to have air that drains out. So now all of whatever you did to create some isolation is no longer useful to you. So not only do you have to add a lot of mass, but you also have to seal it very well. Which brings up the next problem, which is if you have this sealed room, it's very uncomfortable to be in unless you exchange the air. So then you get into expensive air conditioning. So there we have multiple problems in just creating this isolated environment. Not to say that it can't be done at a price that's within the realm of what many musicians can afford, or engineers. Yeah, you can do it, but it's not going to be $150.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, I've known from over the years of building studios, when we just have separation between control rooms and live rooms, we take the concrete floor and break it.
Yep.
Yeah, that was a lot of investment. I don't think that's among many of us. But I also wonder, it's all about priorities, isn't
Yes.
it? It's all about, that would be in the purest sense where I wouldn't want to hear the kick drum or the bass amp in the control room. But the reality is, for most people, if you can look past those kind of situations, you can still get great results.
Yeah, I mean, I think we both know of situations where, and probably you've been in this, and I know I have, you're in an environment and you just learn to deal with it, and you get used to it, and you learn what works and what doesn't, and you figure it out, and your ears automatically figure it out if you know what to listen for, and you can make it work. It's just like speakers. I never believed that there was a perfect speaker. There was a speaker that you're used to.
Absolutely. I think, isn't that sort of in general learning your room? I mean, for me, that's actually what mastering engineers have done for me.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, I've mixed something, I send it off to Gavin, and Gavin comes back and says, yeah, it's really good, but you had a 200 hertz bump.
Yeah.
So even though I don't hear that in my room, I start to become aware of it. So I maybe pull out a little 200 on some areas where it was building up, especially for those of us who have consoles where 150, 200 always seems to have a build up.
No kidding. Yeah, that definitely happens. And, you know, it's funny because there's a problem in every room for the most part. And when you find that problem, you either learn how to work around it, or it takes a lot of money to fix it.
Sure.
So usually the best way to do it, the most expeditious way, is to learn how to work around it. And I'm sure that's probably the case with you, and I know it is for me, where it's like, well, I know I have this problem, and I know it's going to take a lot of time and money and experimentation, because even the best acousticians experiment a lot. That's one of the things that kind of astounded me when I finally got into this, and it was like, well, those guys, they experiment as much as anybody else to make things right. You know, when it's all said and done, there's a lot of art in this science as well, and there's a lot of craft. So it's not what we think all the time.
And I mean, is absolutely dead doesn't mean it sounds good.
Oh, never did.
Yeah.
Although there is one place where that works, and that's voiceovers.
Right.
Where they want a fairly dead environment, and they need a dead environment. But other than that, no. Like a Foley studio, sometimes they want it really dead.
Awesome. I remember sending a mix off to Mark Ender maybe 15 plus years ago, and apologizing for like a little bit of ambience in the vocal mic, expecting with the guy as, you know, as great as that to be kind of upset with me, you know. And he's like, oh, good, I won't have to use as many reverbs.
Yeah, right.
I think that is part of our job, is the workaround. But what I love about this $150 kind of suggestion is it takes something which may be completely unusable and bring it to a place where it's usable. Because, you know, in garages in particular, concrete everywhere, steel or aluminum doors, all of this kind of stuff that's going to be almost impossible to work with.
It's really difficult, but the fact of the matter is, if you create this reflection-free zone, you're a long way there. Now, the next question would be, okay, how many acoustic panels do I need? Well, you need as many as big as the zone needs to be. Now, how big does that need to be? If you're having reflections that are coming back at you, then you need more panels. So there's a way to figure that out, and that's the old mirror trick. And you put a mirror against the wall, and every place that you can see the speaker, that means you need a panel, acoustic panel. So you finally get to a point where you don't see the speaker any longer, and you don't need a panel there.
Right.
Yeah.
This is in my mind. I'm remembering opinions on speakers, because when you get people giving you their opinion on, there's some ATCs here, the Channel X, the Adams, all these different makes. I'm always intrigued when I know a speaker really, really well, and somebody comes back to me and says, "Oh, I don't like those. Those are too bright, too low middly, too this and too that," where obviously that's their experience based in the room they're in. I mean, there's accepted looking at curves and saying it's bright or dull. But it's interesting, until I go into a room like this, which is extremely well balanced, I don't know if I really know my speakers. In fact, what they're really telling me. So I take that information. I think that is the beauty of having a mastering engineer, is that I can sort of suspend, I can let something else be that last process, that last person that I can talk to.
Yeah.
And it's really beautiful. I remember the first time ever going to a proper mastering studio, which is actually the old Oasis.
Oh, yeah.
With, in America with Eddie Schreier. And I remember the low end on my mix was just so horrific. But I didn't know, because my speakers were like this big.
Sure, yeah.
And my room was whatever. But the speakers weren't going to produce 20 or 40 hertz, at least not in enough consistency that would have really bothered me. And then I went into this room with giant speakers like this, and I'm just like, I'm embarrassed, because all this low rumble going on and all this kind of stuff. So I don't think we can ever underestimate a good listening environment. But more importantly, or as importantly, we can't underestimate the job of a great mastering engineer.
Are you an NS10 guy?
I was, no longer. I used to use them all the time. And then I started monitoring on other speakers and got to enjoy them for longer periods of time, and wasn't as fatigued, until eventually they would come on once or twice a day maximum, and then not for a couple of days. And I started, because I have my own room, I started tracking and mixing on the same speakers, and didn't have that mentality of the NS10 of going, these are my tracking speakers.
Yeah.
Because for a while, I'm sure like most of us, because of that 7 dB lift at 1.5K, you get used to the snare drum going crack and guitars going rah. But after a while, you know how to identify that same aggression in other speakers. So you don't need them as much. But I for the longest time, that was the only way I knew how to know, I knew whether a guitar or a snare drum sounded good, was to check them on the NS10s.
I can never make them work for whatever reason.
Probably there's that mid-range.
Probably. And it's interesting, because I went to a friend of ours, shall remain nameless, very big mixing engineer, and I said, and the reason why...
Well, I can tell you that we all know the 2 or 3 guys that still mix on NS10s and love them.
Well, anyway, I said to him, okay, how do you do this? And he said, well, I turn, especially the low end. I said, how do you get your low end to work? And he says, well, I turn up loud enough that I can see the cones crinkle, and then I know I have it right. Yeah. And I thought, whoa, okay, I don't think I can do that. So it just goes to show you, whatever you need to do to make it work.
But it was like little golds. I love those.
Yeah.
Speakers.
Oh, yeah.
I love those speakers. But there's however, every guy I knew that mixed on them, Dave Jordan in particular, with the Mastering Lab crossovers in them, that was the way to go. Mastering Lab crossovers.
Absolutely.
They would always say the same thing, that when it just went, started to distort on the kick drum, they knew they had it perfect.
Yeah.
There was always these tells for speakers.
I don't know if that's good or bad.
Well, I think in a world now where we have so much choice, it would be considered bad. But at that time, Little Golds were one of the most effective speakers because of that In England we call it dual concentric, but that basically,
Still my favorite,
Yeah.
actually. I love dual concentric speakers. I have a hard
Yeah.
time using anything else.
yeah, because everything was coming at you from one direction. You didn't have that thing where you were like, which I still have now with tweeters, whether they're ribbon or not. You know, you're sort of like, oh, I moved my head 3 inches too high, and you know, with those kind of speakers, it was always, you know, the trade-off was maybe on the low end, not quite having the detail you wanted, but everything else was so incredible about it.
I just heard some Amphions that I really enjoyed. As a matter of fact, I tracked on them, and I thought, boy, these are really good. I'm really liking these, which were not dual concentric, but I felt that I could make the transition. I don't know if I will, but I enjoyed it.
There's a lot of good talk about them.
Yeah.
But again, it comes back to, you know, Gavin and Ruben have ATCs, and when I come in here, it sounds absolutely amazing. So I think, should I get ATCs? But then I think to myself, well, I have a Genelec since the 90s.
Oh,
and
well,
I know
you're used to that sound then.
I'm used to that sound.
Yeah. Although their new dual concentrics are supposed to be wonderful.
They are amazing, yeah.
You've heard them?
I've heard, and they brought them over. I absolutely love them, but I just said, but I know how to make these sound great.
Yeah, sure.
But you know, when people ask me now, and I think this is a good place to go to. When people ask me now about what they should buy, I always say, if you're not used to something, then you're now in a beautiful place where you don't have to rely on some of us old timers, you know, like they've been doing this for 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
You don't have to rely on our opinions so much. What I mean is you can rely on some of the wisdom, but you don't necessarily have to use the same equipment we do.
Yeah, yeah.
Like people say, should I buy a console? I'm like, for mixing, you know, Mark Endert mixes in the box now. He
Yeah,
had a
sure.
9J or 9K for years.
Yeah.
Last guy I ever expected to move off an SSL, one of the most anal mixers, is now mixing in the box. So what does that tell you? You know, Neil Avron.
Well, a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're forced to do recalls that are fast.
Sure.
So if you can't do it, somebody else can. There's a lot of that involved anymore. So it's kind of like, well, you have to evolve with the industry.
The reason why I chose those two guys, though, because there's lots of catchphrase names of people that mix in the box.
Right.
And most of that was out of a necessity, like you say. They always, one person I can think of that always talks about mixing in the box and talks about being in a hotel room. And I totally relate to that and everything.
Yeah.
But Neil and Mark did this very gradual process. They went consoles. Like I mixed with Neil like 4 or 5 years ago, and he was on 4K. Actually, it was a 6K, but yeah, an SSL. Then he went SSL summing. Mark did the same thing, the SSL to summing.
Yeah.
And now in the box, and there's been no degradation of quality. And they did this as a gradual thing, and definitely the necessity part of it. But the two guys I respect because I realized that they didn't lose any of the quality along the way. There was no like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know many, I feel the same way. I can do what I can do in the box. It's not going to sound quite as good as on a console. Boy, it's going to sound pretty much there.
Yeah.
It's not enough that people are going to say, oh, I hate this mix because it just doesn't have the sound. We're all like that now.
Yeah.
Well, the tools are better, first of all. And second of all, you learn how to adapt. It's been, 10 years? Oh, it's been more than that now. We're 15 years into this where mixing in the box is more and more of a reality. So in the beginning, yes, there was a quality problem. And it was gain staging for the most part, because everyone thought, well, I can really push this hard, but when you did that, the mix collapsed. And then when everybody figured out the gain staging is similar to analog, and you have to treat it that way, and then suddenly the mixes started to sound bigger, more open, and then the tools got better, and all the way around. So now that's where we're at. We're at that conjunction of ability and capability, I think.
Talking of that sort of crossover, though, it's making me think of something. I'm enjoying some of the makers finally, I think, moving away from having to name check old pieces of equipment.
Oh, yes, I agree.
Do you know what I mean? I feel like if I'm 13 years old and I've got my laptop or whatever setup I've got, and this is going to upset some of our viewers, but why do I really need to know what an LA2A is?
Yeah, right.
As much as I love LA2As, shouldn't I just have like the ability to have different flavors
Yeah.
of compression? And I get it, because when it first came in, you wanted those catchphrases to draw guys like you and I into
Yeah.
wanted to mix it. But now I feel like for a new generation of people, like we were talking about with speakers.
Yeah.
It's really a case of like, just because we make, not me, us particularly, but just because somebody uses NS10s doesn't mean NS10s are the best for the job anymore. It's like, I'm really enjoying the sort of the think ahead kind of companies that are doing that.
I think
with plugins.
a lot of this has to do with the fact that we've kind of run out of those old pieces,
Sure.
those vintage pieces, and the ones that are left, it's not like they had great popularity anyway.
Sure. You were talking to Gavin earlier, and what you touched on for a while that I enjoyed that you guys were talking about was tape, and something that Tim Palmer and I have had a lot of conversations about the love affair with tape wasn't really there when we were on tape. Tommy Vicari talked about it as well.
Yeah.
He goes, we all said the same thing. We used to have to like take 10K and do 3 dB on everything to have it come back sounding the same way that we were printing it.
Yeah.
And so this love affair with tape, I think, has got a little bit lost because A, it never sounded like you were saying with Gavin, the same with the way you printed it, number one. And secondly, the benefit of tape wasn't necessarily as much as the Sonics, but the mentality of sending a guy or a girl in there to perform, not with the fix it afterwards mentality. I think that's something that's more important about tape that we should remember, is that when you realize that you had to get it right, that you went into the room as the bass player and went, oh, I'm on top of the kick drum.
Yes, right.
You didn't go, oh, can you edit me back?
Yeah.
You went back in there and played.
And the fact that you had musicians that were actually in the room playing together.
Exactly.
And there was a certain amount of leakage, that has its beauty as well and its place. And boy, there's so much that we hear now that doesn't have, well, it has musicians playing, but they're not playing together. I'm not going to lament the fact that that's happened.
Sure.
Because it's the evolution of the business. It's the way it works. But boy, there's a beauty to having great musicians playing together.
I think we're in a period. This morning I was chatting with some of the subscribers and stuff, and one of the things that we talked about was how technology always shapes what we do.
Yeah.
But it always settles. And I was using the analogy of the DX7. And when the DX7 came out, we had Fender Rhodes and Wurlitzers. A DX7 came out and suddenly we had Doogie Howser theme tune. You know what I mean? We had like a terrible sounding, thin electric piano because it was the new electric piano. But then give it 5 years, everybody was like, whoa, wait there. That sounds thin and horrible.
Yeah.
Not taking anything away from a DX7. It was a great keyboard. But we sort of always do this. As humanity, we take a new piece of equipment and the original 16-bit or 8-bit digital comes out, everybody starts making records on that and then goes, oh, wait there, that's not better.
Yeah.
So I think that I really feel strongly that as much as we have like online, like mastering services, I actually feel like they will exist and they will continue to flourish, but I think there will be an understanding of why you need a mastering engineer more and more. Like a boutique business will actually like harden and actually become more relevant in the same way that you want to buy a guitar, you now go to somebody who can build a guitar exactly the way you want it.
Yeah.
Just because you can buy a $500 guitar that plays like a Les Paul, yeah, that's nice. But what about that guy or that girl that can make you that guitar, which is everything you want?
Well, along those lines, I think this goes beyond the line actually, but
good.
I've talked to many mastering engineers that told me they're getting stems in.
Beautiful.
The idea being, okay, your environment is better than the mixers, so why don't you put the song together?
I think that's great.
You do?
Yeah. I think it's great because I don't like when a mastering engineer asks me for stems, because I want to go back and figure out why he wants it.
Right.
But this is what I do for a living. Now, if a client is like, I am unsure, I want your expertise. It depends on the dynamic.
Okay, well, yeah, that helps you in the long run, because then that means there's fewer revisions that you have to do.
Exactly. So I think for a mastering engineer, if they're asking for stems, there's a reality that maybe that, but then they're also communicating something that they need improved upon.
I don't know what they were asking for it. They were getting them. The client was asking them to do this.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, no, I understand. I
Yeah.
think, but I think it's at least it's a sense of honesty. At least it's like going, you are smarter. You're in a room. You have acquired knowledge. First of all,
Yeah.
there's no substitute for acquired
absolutely
knowledge.
not.
We can talk all day about, plugins and great rooms and speakers and stuff, but acquired knowledge will win every single day. I'll go on a quick thing here. I did a mix off with 7 mixers at the insistence of a label. 7 mixers mixed. They were like these, and I won't say who lost, but 4 of the guys that were gone immediately when all level matched were all the newer up and coming hot guy of the week or girl of the week.
Yeah.
The 2 that were left and eventually won. Well, Tim Palmer won it blind test with the band, and the second guy, who will remain nameless because he didn't win, that's not fair, had equal 30, 40 years experience. It's not necessarily about what's young and hip and new and the best tool and this kind of stuff. It really does come down to, you can give somebody the tools. You can tell me exactly how you mix something. I can tell you exactly how I mix something.
It'll be
and
different.
It's still completely different.
Yeah. How do you feel about using a template to mix? And let me preface that.
Yeah, good.
There's, and we all know Chris Lord Algae does this, and there's also a mixer in Nashville, Billy Decker.
I don't know Billy's work, but I know Chris's.
Billy's had a number of big hits, number ones, so he does well. And his mixes are done 2 to 3 hours. But he does everything in the box, unlike Chris.
Oh, okay.
So I grilled him on this. I said, okay, so how do you do this? He says, I have this template. I know it works. And I don't care what kind of music I get. It can be metal, it could be dance, whatever. I can tell just by the waveform how much I have to gain clip it, so it's going to hit my compressor the way I want it, et cetera. And this apparently works for him. He did this because he only wanted to work a 9 to 5, because he wanted to be home with his kids at night. Wonderful way to work. And it works for him because he has number ones. So people are going to him. What's your thoughts?
There's 8. I'll start from the end. He has number ones and people are going to him. Work begats work.
Yeah.
That's the first answer, I'd say, working backwards.
Right.
So I think that's very important. It's important for everybody here. If you're working and you're doing good work, you'll get more work.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing, and you get more opportunity. So I'm not taking anything away from him, but I think that's important as well, because that doesn't often get discussed. If you have a number one single, your chances of getting another number one single just went up like a million times.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's also important, because opportunity is the mother of invention. You start making decisions based on what the opportunities are, the kind of work you get. So I think that's a very important thing to in working, answering your question in reverse.
Yeah.
Secondly, templates definitely save time, in as much as if you're getting consistent amount of stuff and you don't have to literally just output 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, bust this, bust that. We do have a certain amount of templates, because when my lead vocal comes in, I have a lot of sends on different reverbs and delays. And the same thing with drums and stuff. So what I'll do is I'll have a repeat amount of things, because I have a lexicon.
And you know what works for you, too.
I know what works for me.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important. Templates are important for people for workflow. But I understand where you're going and the question that you're asking, because there's also, we were talking off camera, and it will remain nameless who it was. We were talking off camera earlier about a specific mixer who's so tied up in a way of doing things that his sound is very influential on the mix. Not even, because the thing about Chris's mixes, he's mixed my stuff and it still has my personality of recording.
Yes,
You'll have your personality, everybody's comes out of it. The way that he mixes still maintains the integrity of the recording.
Yeah.
There are some mixers that sound like they mixed it more than Chris's does.
You might want that, you might not. So yeah.
Yeah, and one mixer we had who has, beyond a template, has such a complex way of mixing with bussing and all this kind of stuff, took the sound from a very, I wouldn't say modern, but a very like upfront kind of thing, and kind of gave it a little bit of a cloudy, to me at least, kind of sound that took away from what we were trying to achieve.
Yeah.
Now, we did end up getting what we wanted with that guy, but some songs were 14 recalls in to sort of cajole it. But that's kind of the one extreme. Most guys or girls that I work with that have mixed external stuff from me, we've always ended up far quicker getting a result that has the integrity of the original recording. So in reality, templates aren't necessarily bad, because they will save somebody a lot of time, like, getting from A to B. But in some instances, it's a little harder.
Yeah, right.
To work around somebody's template, depending on what it is. And I think that actually goes back to what we were talking about earlier, between mixing with a template on a console as opposed to mixing with a template in a DAW.
Way different. Yeah.
DAWs are a lot easier on a template to snap it out. Somebody comes back to you and says, I really don't like that vocal sound. I want it to be brighter, darker, left, right, pink, purple, whatever it might be. You can change that 100 times quicker than the routing through the SSL with split up and bust over here and this patched over there and blah, blah, blah. And that's bust through this bus and this blah, 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 and hits that compressor like this and all summed back in with this mult and that parallel. I mean, that's like a...
Now, see, I have a...
Great question.
I have a version of that. And what I'll do is I'll have a project template where I'll go through in the first song, kind of figure out what works. And this is assuming now that it's a band that's played together, so all the songs sort of sound the same. And they usually will in a project. And off that first song, I'll pretty much figure out, okay, if I want this sound to stay for the rest of the record, which usually you do, sometimes not, but usually, then that's my template. And then I'll recall that at least as a starting place for all the other songs.
Sure.
Might not stay there, but it's a starting place. So it's a modified version. And it does save time because once you figure that first, but mastering engineers do the same thing. They work really hard on the first song, they figure out the EQ, and then everything else is fairly easy from there. Except if it's a compilation, for instance, where there's different mixers and different environments. But if it's the same album coming from the same producer, artist, usually it's fairly easy.
Yeah, I think that's the I wouldn't say fault, but that lies with the producer, the engineer, and the mixer.
Yeah.
I would say as a whole possible tangent here, I mean, that comes down to what people are always talking about with the classic albums. How you put on Revolver and you're like, here's a song with just a horn section, not even a band member in it.
Yeah.
Here's a song with acoustic guitar and orchestra.
Yeah.
Here's a song with, Taxman, which sounds like indie rock.
Yeah.
Might as well be Smashing Pumpkins, Gish era. It's like, there's all of this different variety, and you sure as heck know if I gave it to Gavin and Rubin to master, every song, and they've done that, they went back and did the George Harrison catalogue, every single song would require a lot of different analysis.
Yeah.
But these days, and it's probably just as much fan-driven, genre-driven, whatever it is now, there is this sort of mentality, and labels very much, as a producer, I can tell you, labels have got a lot of problem, because if they get a hit song, they kind of want the next album to have 10 versions of that hit song.
No kidding.
But
it's sort of always been like that, especially in the more modern age. Of labels.
Yeah, I mean, I always harp on, and my viewers will laugh at me silently or very out loud. I always harp on about my favorite personal band is Queen, and I always talk about The Game, which is a 1980 album.
Yeah.
And the reason why I choose 1980 as a year, because there's nobody alive that ever talks about 1980 as being a great year for music.
Yeah.
They always go Summer of
It's a transition
Love.
year, yeah.
Yeah, 67, 76 for punk in England. Everybody talks about maybe 92, 91, Nevermind, whoa, all this kind of stuff. But 1980, The Game had 4 massive hit singles. Obvious ones, Play the Game, classic Queen. Save Me, classic Queen. Another one, Bites the Dust, disco.
Yeah, that's way
Crazy
off,
Little Thing Called Love,
Yeah.
50s rock and roll.
Yeah.
Completely different genres.
Yeah.
And everybody, and another one, Bites the Dust, and Crazy Little Thing Called Love are 2 of the most played radio songs of all time. And they're on the same album.
Queen can get away with it then because they were a massive success. That being said, the mentality was different. And now you wonder if an A&R guy would let that go through.
Yeah. Actually, technically, they weren't a success in America. It died off massively for them. They'd had a little bit of success around Bohemian Rhapsody time, but it hadn't really connected. And it came back quite dramatically because they were able to get on radio with Another One Bites the Dust, got crossover play
Yeah,
onto
that
disco.
was huge. Yeah, right.
And the fact that they were able to take that risk, and they had pushback from their label at the time, talking labels of like, you can't do disco.
Yeah.
You're a bunch of, dudes from England. So I think that I think
But it's
great songs are great songs.
It was their take though.
No,
on,
I agree.
on disco, and that's always been the secret. It's the synergy of genres. It's your take on whatever's
Sure.
happening, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But when it works, it's fantastic. I always loved world music, but not indigenous world music. I loved it when it took whatever was the style of the region and took Western music and put it together, because there's always
Peter
something.
Gabriel is the absolute undisputed king of
No
that.
kidding.
And he pays so much
great.
respect to his artists.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But again, you got something, and still do. There's so much interesting things that happen when you get that melding of the genres.
I agree. I think it's important. I've had a lot of these discussions, and I try to incorporate them in a lot of our Q&As and stuff, because that's really, to me, what we should always be trying to do, is push the boundaries.
Yeah.
And whether Zeppelin, like heavy rock band or a rock band, it's like, I think Jimmy Page said just fairly recently, a few years ago, but 75% of our records are acoustic guitars.
Yeah.
Most of your songs, or when you think it's heavy, it's one electric guitar, bass and drums.
It's fairly clean sometimes. And it's funny because what people considered as a heavy guitar sound is not what we'd consider heavy today. And back then it was, guitar through a Marshall and turned up. But that's a clean sound.
Yeah.
In many cases. Yeah. Yeah.
AC/DC,
right.
Back in Black, Highway to Hell.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Then Metallica came along, and it was like this 5-amp stack wall of hit you over the head, kind of stuff. And that was the new heavy, and changed the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. All right. Well, this has been absolutely fantastic. We could talk all day.
We could.
And so we should do another one where we do talk all day.
You name it, you call it.
Marvelous. Well, thank you ever so much, Bobby. I really
Thanks, Warren.
appreciate it. Please, as ever, leave a bunch of comments and questions below. I'd like to know all your thoughts. We specifically came here to listen, to talk a lot about like the whole process that we do here leading up to mastering, because I have a very strong belief that I don't like the word experts, but I think people here with a lot of acquired knowledge, and mastering engineers are really the last stop for me. I learn more from mastering than I do probably from my own mixing.
I agree.
Marvelous. Have a wonderful time recording and mixing. Leave a bunch of questions and comments below.